Welcome back to the Let's Pivot podcast, where we join with owners and founders, hear about their business story and place that they're trying to take their business to. Today, we're joined with Ian and Chris. Good morning, guys. How are you doing today?
To be here.
Hey,
Nice.
thanks
Thank
for
you
having
for
us.
joining us. Yeah, of course. All right. So, guys, we like to start off every conversation with why'd you decide to do this? Why'd you decide to go out on your own and start BraveCore? Where'd the idea come from and what do you guys do?
I guess I can start with that. I have a background in healthcare for over a decade and a little bit of a writing and marketing experience prior to that. And I really loved becoming a practitioner and a leader in that space. But there was a side of me that was always kind of nagging in my head, in my dreams about the creative side of work. And it's really easy to get very focused and operationalized in what we do. And perhaps sometimes we all feel that squeeze sometimes where, you question your identity, you question your abilities at times. But I led with that question, what else is out there, right? And what could I do if I, stretched myself? And that's where Chris and I met. We met in the Bay Area of California. Chris was at Apple at the time, and I'll let him do his intro in a second. But we were wrestling with these questions, and we were searching for answers, reading the best books that were out there, all the podcasts. And the common ground that we found was we kept going back in our conversations to this breadth of work that Stephen Covey offered in the Seven Habits, and a set of principles that guided a previous era of entrepreneurship, right, in the late 80s, early 90s. Huge hit, very popular. We still reference it to this day. And so we were at this stage in our careers where we're looking for a set of principles that could guide us in the modern era we're in, right? There's so many things that are shifting, a world that feels divided. Leaders used to rely on their old playbooks and be able to kind of get back on their feet. And now it doesn't feel like that as much. And so that's what we set out to do. We were looking for these answers. And what we realized is we had to curate these answers because we couldn't find it in a current book. And so I'll let Chris go from there.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that, I'd been at Disney prior to that, before Ian and I met. And during the acquisition of Pixar, I got really interested in creativity and that as a part of this future, the blending kind of this notion of the principles that like Seven Habits embodies, but what were the principles of the future, right? For leaders, for culture, for teams to really achieve growth in that future. And what we saw in Pixar was these notions of really powerful creativity principles. And when I got to Apple, I saw the same thing, just amplified with products, and realizing that, well, actually, this is how the most innovative teams and leaders really work, right? And how the future works. And this could be in any domain. So Ian and I set about really pulling together what are those principles, or we call meta principles of the future, for any leader and for any team. And to boil it all down, it's really about breaking out of fear. And the world tells us work harder, work smarter, and that's enough. Those are good things, to be brave. But braving it alone can only get us so far. So we have to be brave together and really work as a team. So I did a lot of work at Apple while Ian and I were working on these questions. And that was, they're great at thinking different, at innovating. And so there was a question of how do we get better at working different together. And so, I had the chance to work with, Tim Cook and some of the other C-level leaders to help power their future. Actually, with AirPods, creating new iterations of AirPods Pro. That was a business that was stood up, $0 to $24 billion business relatively quickly.
Thank you for that, by the way.
Oh. I can't claim all the credit.
It's never been the same since those things have come out, man. You've improved
We're
everybody's
fans,
life with that.
Yeah, it's worked out pretty well. And I obviously can't claim all the credit, but I was part of working with those teams and leaders to help them converge. After the first iteration of AirPods, which were pretty good, but to really take it to the next level in how they worked together and how they created just so much better connection and better a better outcome in the products. And then so with Ian and I, it was zooming out from that to ask ourselves, well, what is it that any leader, any person, any team, any organization needs to know in any domain, any industry. And, we see so much disruption with AI and all these challenges that the future is really hitting us in the present. And so people feel disrupted, right? They feel like, hey, it's not this linear, predictable, canoe trip down the river, A to Z. It's turned into a river rafting trip every day, right? People are getting knocked out of the boat. There's layoffs happening. There's a lot of challenges that are real. And this is in any industry we're in. But there's a huge upside to all of this is, what can technology do? What does the future hold, if we're really leaning into investing in growth? And, our approach is really about co-creation. And so the business, what we do is spend time with leaders, with coaching leaders, coaching teams, working with organizations to help them to be better at co-creating and working together in a shared future. It's not just self-made, but it's creating the best products and services together that can 3, 4, 10x their business, but most importantly, do good in the world and, change the world from within.
Let me ask you, I mean, that sounds like your passion, right? Leadership, developing leaders, changing the way people think. What is the business side of that look like? I mean, I have, dealt with some entrepreneurs. They tend to be very gritty people, right? Kind of very determined. It seems very hard at times to change their mind or get them to think differently. How do you guys approach that?
Yeah, so two things come to mind, right? First of all, I think it's very hard for people to change. I think it's really easy to stay in our comfort zones and to rely on our superpowers that have worked, our talents and maybe skills that have got us to this point in our careers. But the world keeps shifting, to Chris's point. And two things come to mind. You either choose to be humble or reality will set in and those circumstances will humble you. And we're experiencing a bit of both as we interact with leaders, right? There's people with eyes to see that are principle based, that know that they can't do it alone, that they don't have all the answers, and they're asking the right questions. And so sometimes it's a matter of timing, and we intersect with them at a point where they're ready and they're hungry. And we don't have all the answers, but our business model is we support people in their development to be co-creators, whatever that takes. It's not a one size fits all. Our book that we wrote, Brave Together, leads people along these lines. It challenges these assumptions. And I feel like the last 2 to 3 years, a lot of leaders, they were guarded, right? Because of so much disruption and uncertainty hitting, the market, our work that we do day in, day out. And so it's refreshing because of those circumstances. People are leaning into what else is out there. They've seen all the traditional models that are there and, consulting practices that, we're seen as experts. We don't start from a premise of expertise. We start from a creative point where we want to help people, create that openness and that sense of, we can do this together. And we show people those initial steps, how to do that.
Team building. Let me ask you, I mean, you guys have worked with giant companies in the very tech-oriented space. How has that evolved over the last 10, 15 years or so? And, I graduated high school in 1997. You barely got on the internet back then, right? And now I can't make a cup of coffee without asking chat, how many scoops of coffee grounds to put in this stupid thing. How has that affected you guys? What have you seen there?
Yeah, I think obviously, like to your point, technology is not just, proliferated and there's been change, but it's become kind of an immersion of our lives, right? We're surrounded by technology that helps us achieve things. And you mentioned, ChatGPT, we call them Chad for short. It's interesting that, we start to have this kind of almost a different relationship with technology. And I think some of those things are huge benefits as far as superabundance. Sometimes they can be distracting. I think what we've noticed we're talking specifically about the tech industry, but I think as an analogy, as a microcosm for businesses, organizations in general, is change. Tech companies tend to lean into change, right? They tend to accept risk and be willing to sacrifice the present for the future. I think that's something that companies are starting to notice, that if they want to be, part of that future, that they have to do a version of that. And the beauty is AI as a solution, not just a one thing, but that a layer right on top of whatever product or service or operations, all these systems that can help, if implemented properly, can really help power these things. So in essence, you have every organization is becoming some version of a tech organization in a sense, as far as the implementation of more technology and throughout the layers of sales, operations, all those things. So that's a big change. Like that's a tectonic change in organizations. And then the question becomes like, what kind of leadership does that require? I think part of it is it's not just pulling a lever. And some organizations have taken quick measures to lay people off, and some of that may be warranted around how do we right size the organization, and in some sense, like we've seen big organizations that enterprise wanting to be startups. So this is an inversion, right? It used to be startups wanted to be enterprise or be the big players. So that's different. And I think the other thing that I'd say is, as a leader, then there are deeper questions, which are, how are you showing up to influence, not just in terms of like adaptability to all of this, which that's a big deal, and then authenticity to how you lead in a way that that you're earning it, right? That they want to follow you, that you're showing up with a sense of inspiration and vision, which is huge. It's also the fact that the acceleration of change is so dramatic that you have to have a point of view as a leader. And so I think that's also very important, and not just be a tactician that's pulling levers, but to have a point of view about how are you leading your people? How are you going to, have a strategy to do these things? And with that point of view, probably most importantly is to do it in the context of team and horizontally, not just verticals, silos, those functions that have been established in the context of business since really the beginning of the invention of business. Right? You have, HR, finance, accounting, et cetera. But when you layer in AI solutions that cut across, the requirements for that is people working across, with each other in more cross-functional ways and collaborative ways. And I think that more than anything else, probably we've noticed, we've done work with like AWS, other companies to start to implement solutions, but really it's about getting the leadership, the team, the culture right. And then those things can layer in.
Okay. And let me ask you, you guys are coming up on about 5 years of BraveCore. Is that,
Yeah.
And I mean, typically the first 5 years are the most difficult, I think, for any business statistically, right? If you can make it through the first 5 years, you're doing something right. You probably have some longevity. Can you tell me about those first 5 years? What were the main challenges getting started? What did you run into?
Yeah, so from my standpoint, I was running healthcare facilities when we were testing this material. Chris was at Apple. He was coaching executives. He had a small team that was focused on culture work, and I was hovering as an advisor with Chris to pull off that work. But I had my day job of handling healthcare, and COVID hit, right? So we probably felt we were ready to write a book back in 2019. We met, there's another story, maybe Chris can get into it, where we met Ed Catmull, the founder of Pixar, who helped as an advisor early on in our work, which gave us a huge boost in confidence, right? But also the daunting challenge that we're aiming for something quite big. When COVID hit, it's not like the business took a back seat. It's actually the ground zero to test these principles. And so as a leader, I had a chance to really work with my teams and pressure test some of the material that we were gaining insights from at Apple. And I did with my team of, 150 to 300 people, depending on the outfits I was managing at the time. But it was really a challenging time, and any business was going through these challenges, right? But at the end of the day, life hits, and I ended up moving during that time frame. About a year and a half out from when COVID hit. I wanted to get my healthcare teams to a good spot where some people left out of fear, and so we were in kind of a rebuild mode and trying to make sense of what was happening around us. But once we got our team intact, I felt like I could, as a leader, responsibly make that shift. And so I would say the first challenge within, this 5-year window was the fact that Chris and I had such a great rhythm, being together in person and working through things in our living rooms and our offices. And as we started to map out what this could be, and I think that was probably one of the hardships early on, was me physically being removed from the equation. And so that next challenge for us then was when we were in a position to write our book, we did it remotely. Like we really enjoy that in-person rhythm, but keeping that dedication, that focus, the consistency with intention to really build this properly, to get an agent, to get a book
Yeah,
deal with a publisher, and then write the book.
yeah, I do want to ask you about that because, especially on something like a book, to be so collaborative on it, right? I have my ideas, right? You have your ideas. How do we, hey, no, I think you're wrong on it. This is what, right? Like, how do you kind of,
Yeah.
was it just you guys had good chemistry together? Or was it specific principles
Well, I
that
think
you teach?
I think part of it was our commitment to the main principle of co-creation, right? Of building something together. And we knew that that was, going to be important for us to do a good job of doing that together. And you're right. I mean, it could get messy. We had times too where we, heavily violently disagreed on something,
For sure.
but but we worked through it, and you just stay committed to collaborating through the challenge. And it was a beautiful thing because even with our editor, she's the exec editor at McGraw-Hill. Now she's at Penguin, just one of the top, phenomenal, fantastic. Her name's Casey Ebro, and she was great to work with as well as far as co-creation. We really had that approach of just loving the work and, building a real sense of team. And, I think going back to your question on being a startup ourselves, right? We do work with startups. We work with, incubators and people that are getting off the ground. And yeah, that first 5 to 7 years, call it, I think Elon Musk describes it as like chewing glass.
Staring into
You know, not a very exciting prospect, right? And then it's like pure valley. And we were in a moment too, to Ian's point, COVID, everybody was off the grid. Leadership development, as far as coaching, et cetera, was not like a priority for businesses. They were pulling back. And then even post that, there was rounds of layoffs that are still happening to some extent. I think now, though, there's a different kind of momentum that started to emerge towards investment in the future, investment in AI. And the future-leaning companies, or the ones that want to win the future, are embracing, I'd say new ideas, but really, some of the notions we've been talking about, we've been building for several years. And so it's great to see this, these things kind of start to converge. And, staying in it in the valley was challenging. I mean, I had my own personal valleys that made it really, really difficult. But, to Ian's point too, connecting with Ed Catmull, that was a shot to the arm, just to supercharge what we were doing. We met with a lot of other great people that we admire, who are great co-creative leaders. And on top of that, the book, when it launched, we, were featured in the Next Big Idea Club, the Malcolm Gladwell. We were in Fast Company, Forbes, like regularly, or Inc. A lot of those things that, are kind of dream experiences. But when it comes to like a services business, you're still waiting for things, the flywheel to start to pick up. And so, it's really been, a commitment to co-creation, a commitment to a shared kind of team approach. And then also, frankly, just being patient with the market, for people to be ready, to get it. Like Mark Andreessen says, sometimes you're way out ahead of something, right? And the market hasn't caught up yet. But it's great to see that's starting to happen. And so leaders are starting to look for more answers. We have like a lot of Gen X leaders or positions of, call it power or control over an organization. And, they're typically on an island, or they like to kind of operate more individually. They like to pull levers. But what we're seeing is they realize they're in this collective universe that requires a team approach from them. And they're sometimes uncomfortable with this, but they know it's happening, right? And the forcing function of that is Gen Y, Gen Z coming, predominantly in the workforce, who are saying, hey, we want a unified approach. Like, how do we do this, together? And so the demands on a Gen X leader is also to be, and it's not just Gen X, but it could be Boomer or even Y. But I think the thing is how do they lead in a shared way?
Okay. So a couple of questions that come to mind. You guys wrote a book. It's a bestseller, Amazon bestseller. Congratulations on that as well. But
Thank you.
where do you see this going, especially with, chat GPT, clone brain type things? Do you think people are still going to be looking to books, reading to books? Do you think it's going to be more like AI trained on specific information so that people could sit there and interactively ask questions or kind of get that? I mean, it's not a one to one, but without you being there, kind of still being able to get to pick your brain on certain situations.
Yeah, I think a good analogy for this is like I have a background in animation years before, and kind of the movie industry, where there's also been AI has shaken that industry quite a bit. I was on a panel in Comic-Con. We were talking about this, but I think it's interesting to see because the art, if it's done well as far as the quality, people will show up for that. And special effects and even 3D animation or 3D effects have been in have existed for a while now, right? Where you could create even a movie based on that for a long time, and people have. But what have they really showed up for? They've shown up for story and characters that have deep meaning, right? Chris Nolan or some of the Pixar stories that they just inspire us. And I think it's similar, it's somewhat analogous to the future, which is it'll be some combination. And you look at Avatar too, they blend technology with humanity, right, to achieve those experiences, and then also with story. But it's deeply human still, even though the technology does the best of what it does, and then we do the best of what we do. And I think combining those things, so it's not the extreme of either or, but it's the synthesis of the things. And I think for people, that's important, because I don't think it's not helpful to be a Luddite and just sit it out and just assume like it's all scary and it's not gonna...
right. Yeah, you can't wait this one out. Wait and see.
I mean, if you did it with these, you'd be like left behind, right, in many ways. And so I think the future, in some sense too, like we talk about a shared future, it's also a shared future with technology.
Yeah.
And so co-creating with technology.
To add to that, we see organizations are looking at potentially replacing workforce and functions and headcount with AI. And there will be a degree of people that start with that premise. But we see AI as really having a seat at the table with key positions and people that are the heartbeat of a business, right? And so our premise still stands true with the material from our book, which is how do we work better together moving forward, right? And that includes AI. So people are looking at how to leverage the tools to make their business better, but we're asking the question, well, what remains with the people that are still in the business? How are we focusing on them? How are you investing in them and bringing it all together, to Chris's point, to tell a great story? And so future ready for us, there's two components. One is, Chris alluded to this, it's setting out that signal, having a point of view, right? So being storytellers. On LinkedIn and social media, we see a lot of AI slop. I can't really discern what a point of view is. I think people are trying to optimize to sound smarter, and they want to have these application aspects to their social media. Like, I'm going to give you the tips and here's the steps. We see that now, and we're just like, oh, there's just this glob of just noise out there. And really, if you can lean into your identity, but not just your identity as an individual or a leader, but you start to make sense of that identity as a culture brand, right? What can you start to do in terms of builds that contribute towards that future? And so, one, it's the point of view, but second to that is, I think, a step that to make us future ready, we need before even blasting out a point of view. It's being grounded in timeless principles. If you were to ask 10 leaders what their first principles are, I would guarantee that at least 8 out of those 10 would struggle to articulate their own first principles. At best, they might rattle off some values that are copy and pasted that sound good. It's conventional wisdom. But to actually do the deep work to establish what those timeless principles are that are going to ground you when the continued waves of change affect us, not just in the coming months, but the coming years, and how to navigate changes, you have to be grounded in timeless principles. But also,
and does that go back to your why? Does that go back to your why?
Absolutely, it does.
What am I doing all this for? Why am I willing to?
And most people just don't take the time to sit in their belief systems and the things that really move them and drive them at their core.
It can be quite uncomfortable.
It can be.
Yeah, it's never fun. I mean, people hate change, but they love progress, or we love progress. So
Yeah.
I think it's sorting out, like, it's not about optimizing for a comfort food lifestyle, right? Like it's not Pop-Tarts and feather beds. I think that's important, right, for us to grasp, like, because human nature kind of wants that, right? Like in some sense. And these tools, and this is where I might disagree even with like Elon, is he say, well, even though the notion of work goes away, I don't necessarily see a world where that, because work is a principle that's timeless. And so if work evolves, right, and even if that work is more on that creative artistic side, and all these things that, like, if you look at the value stack of hey, blue collar, white collar, all that stuff that's like pretty checkboxy, can be automated, gets taken over, great. Like, but we move up the value chain, and there's work to do in that world of the future, because we all have talents. We're here on earth for a purpose. And I think that's also something the leaders and teams and organizations that have purpose and meaning that can stand the test of time, that is going to stand out in the future. And how that gets expressed and manifested in the products and services, it matters. And so I think those kinds of things, and you might ask, if you're a leader, well, where do I start? Like, this sounds pretty lofty, right? It's actually very simple. One of the ways to start doing what we're talking about is to build a brain trust, right? To create a team that's focused on co-creation. And that may be just you and a co-founder. It might be, you and a team. If you're in a bigger organization, it could be, how do I pull together key stakeholders across different functions and be more of a cross-staff meeting as well, right? And we get together, and it's egos off the table, building blocks on the table, and just working together in a different and new way. And what that does, we do that with AirPods and iPhones, and it works miraculously. Like, it's magic, right? And great products emerge from this. And the other beautiful thing that emerges is, we talk about flow, that state of mind that you feel when you're doing what you love, right? Could be playing a sport, basketball, if you love that, or swimming, or painting, or even playing video game, whatever your thing is. But how often at work do you feel like you're doing not only the best work of your life, but that you're in a flow state, but with others in a meeting? And
Not usually.
by the way,
That's right.
yeah, not usually, right? Not usually.
Not
But by the way, that's actually
That's the aspiration, though.
how amazing products and services get made and get brought and delivered to customers, in the future. And I think that's something that you can start small, though. Just start small by having those kinds of conversations and creating that kind of team.
Okay. I like it. Sounds like good advice. Now, let me ask you this, guys, and I won't keep you too much longer. I appreciate you coming on today. Where are you going to? What are your goals for the future? What do you guys have planned for us?
Yeah, so we actually just launched a version of our services called BraveSpace. And so BraveSpace goes beyond the notions of what we've been hearing in recent years, people calling a safe space, right? We feel like a safe space is part of the equation, but it's too low of a bar. We don't want to just create bubbles for our team to just be safe in certain moments. We want to build courage into the operating rhythms of what we do, but to have a principled approach. So psychological safety, respect for others still are at play, but it could limit us if we're just trying to keep things in a safe space. What we want to do is create a brave space where leaders can not just follow the old scripts, and they can show up in a more principled human way. And teams are really craving that right now. And so, yeah, leaders, it's a new skill set. It's how can they become better coaches and facilitators? And to Chris's point, by starting small, it's a leader has to start being introspective and really sort out how they can start to be a co-creator themselves. That's really where it starts internally. But the team starts to feel and sense a different presence from the leader, right? And so that's what we help with our services with BraveSpace. We do a leadership coaching and development program that we do. And so we take a group of leaders, a team of leaders, it could be a C-suite or senior directors level, and we really challenge our previous assumptions. But we're here to support. We're not there to just fly in, do a keynote or a workshop and fly out. It's really a partnership. It's a collaborative feel. And most consultants have the pressure to have all the answers. We have a direction and we have a structure to how this all works and unfolds in cultures. And it starts small, and we can walk you through that. We can experience that with you. And we really want to empower these leaders and teams to be supercharged for the future, to be ready. And so we're really excited about Brave Space and what that could do for companies.
Yeah, it sounds really exciting. It seems like you're going to be able to leverage your knowledge, experience,
Point of view.
really be able to connect with more people.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey guys, thank you for coming on today. Let me ask you last thing before I let you go. What is your one piece of advice? What's your one piece of advice for the entrepreneurs, CEOs, other coaches, founders?
Yeah, I'd say like going back to the challenge of doing this kind of work, bringing a point of view into the world. It's, you're exercising, and make sure you're exercising high agency, right? We talk about that, like the idea of just how much can you have an influence on the work you're doing. And, this notion of team and sharing with others as a team amplifies that, right? So your high agency plus their high agency creates an incredible impact in the world. And, a lot of us want to change the world, and that's great. But changing the world from within, starting with yourself, your culture in your life, your mind, your heart, your spirit, those principles, those things combined. And as those work together, it will help power your future. And again, going back to start small, just stack days, right? Stack the moments. It's like, hey, I want to get stronger, right? Okay. Exercise, diet, sleep, stack that every day. And, do reading, right? Stay abreast of like what's happening out there, right? We can't know all the stuff about AI, but there's things we can discover and, stay connected to what matters without being distracted, and stack those as well, those learnings. And then, how you connect with others. It may be like, wow, how do I tackle getting all these clients? It's like, well, set up lunches every week, connect with 5 to 10 people in different ways. LinkedIn, there's all these tools to do this. There's AI tools that are starting to do some of this, but, keep that human aspect of what can you do? Because the future with AI, the question isn't necessarily what can AI do? I think that is a question, because let's harness its strengths. But the other question, to Ian's earlier point, is what can it not do that we do and that we will continue to do very well, and that you can do, that's perpetual motion, right? The elusive perpetual motion machine that science can't do. And I don't know that AI can even do that, but we can, our humanity, and it's powered by culture. And so I think finding ways to do that with others. And, one just simple practical way is to ask better questions, to lead with questions and not with answers. And to Ian's point, how often do we show up as the expert just wanting to dump knowledge? And, a lot of consulting has done this. And what's happening with them, with those experts? Well, you look at McKinsey, Bain, et cetera, they're getting fully disrupted. They're laying off a lot of people. Why? Because people just look and they say, well, I just talked to Chad, right? Chat GPT, I get the answers. This is all commoditized, this knowledge, right? That's not where the space you want to be in. The space you want to be in is an original voice, and there's original work to what you do, and it has creative elements to it, and it's built into a team. And it's not just relying on a brand name. It's not just relying on, knowledge that can be commoditized. There's a story, and there's a story that people want to be part of. So I think that's huge for people. And that's what I'd say is, and that story is shared. It's not just self-made.
To add to that, to really make this more concise as a takeaway, we coach leaders with something called the mirror test. And so it's really looking in the mirror at this stage, instead of blaming your other circumstances or people around you or the economy, right? It's like looking in the mirror and asking, what can I do differently? So you really have two choices. Are you managing an image, or are you building an identity? And so that's the thing that could really start to make the shift in your life and as you're building towards the future.
I like that. It reminds me of something that I saw, and it said, if you want to find out who to blame for all the problems in your life, just go look in a mirror.
That's right.
It's the
mirror test,
you.
right?
The mirror test. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, hey, thank you guys. I appreciate you coming on the Let's Pivot podcast. Ian and Chris, BraveCore. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. I hope you have an amazing day.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Chuck.
Good
It's
stuff.
been great to be here.